For me, transitioning was starting to take hormones. Your skin gets way softer. You lose a lot of body hair. Your fat completely redistributes. Your hair gets softer. Here.
like why? What's not to want, really, from all of that? Come on, all you men out there watching, you don't want softer skin? You don't want nicer hair? You don't want a dumpy? All you estrogenized cis men out there are based and epic, and I support you wholeheartedly. So as you may well know, I'm a bit of a trans woman myself. Well, kind of a trans femme person. Don't necessarily identify with a woman, but I also do. I identify as all genders, but also none of them. You already know the deal. So I figure, what other better time to insert my own commentary and opinions than to talk over some trans women. So we've got Anthony Padilla's "I Spent a Day with Trans Women," quote, "controversial to be a woman." Came out 12 days ago. It's almost got 1 million views, and it's 26 minutes long, which is a substantial amount of time. Ideally, I'm not reacting to videos this long because I talk a lot, and this could very easily turn into a 3-hour, epic. But we'll see what's up. Big fan of Anthony Padilla's work. We've watched the video he did on maladaptive daydreaming in the past. We've also watched the video on "I Spent a Day with Bisexuals" in the past. So let's see what's up. I spend every day with a trans, so we'll see what's going down.
I'm Anthony Padilla, and I'm curious.
That's true.
What would you do if someone looked at your body when you were born and demanded that you behave and present exactly how the greater population deemed fit, even though deep down you've always known it was a lie?
I'd call them a pussy and then bonk them with a big stick, metaphorically speaking.
I spent a day with trans women who came to that very conclusion. We'll uncover the truth about the reality of transitioning and the deeply polarizing topics of surgery, detransitioning, and the trans agenda.
Hello,
Transgender? Jada?
Nice to meet you.
Wait! I feel like we've seen this person before. Have we not? Have they not been in other... Well, it makes sense that when it comes to Anthony Padilla, he's looking for people that got social media presences because 1, networking, 2, easy to find people that way to bring on your program. So many people are saying that I could have also been on Anthony Padilla's program, but unfortunately I don't identify as a trans woman. I identify as everything and nothing at all. Technically, I'm under the umbrella. I could have been in consideration, but apparently, we're doing a little bit of gatekeeping on the Padilla broadcast today. Frankly, I find it to be a bit toxic. What are you doing, Anthony?
Hi, nice to meet you.
By the way,
I'm joking, but I don't think it would be a good play to bring me on for the "I Spent a Day with Trans Women" video. Because, my gender identity being an amoebic blob, it's not going to be representative of the experience of a trans woman. You know what I mean? While I might still be a trans femme person, I don't have the same experiences because I don't deal with a bunch of things that trans women would typically experience because of the way that, my gender or lack thereof is.
And I just want to say you are serving real right now. Yeah. As a cisgender man,
Yes.
I can definitely say that.
Yeah, maybe bleep when you say it, but don't bleep when I say it.
Can we say one thing? I really appreciate how much Anthony accessorizes, especially for a sissy. He's got all these rings, all these bracelets and whatnot, the chain. I appreciate that. I also appreciate how the Hassan does that as well. You appreciate masculine men accessorizing. Some say more need to do it.
Can you define what trans means?
When you are assigned a specific gender at birth, and then you feel differently than the gender you were assigned.
There's no one way to be trans. Basically, if you identify with a different gender, you're under the trans.
Can you define trans women specifically?
We were assigned male at birth, and we now are female.
Is there an age range when people typically start to feel like they...
So essentially, to be trans is to identify as a gender that is different from the one you were assigned at birth. Meaning that if you were assigned male at birth, but you identify as non-binary or a woman, then you are trans. Technically. There are non-binary people out there that I think when it comes to the semantic definition of trans are technically trans. I don't think you have to identify with the term if that doesn't really fit for you. So I think that's fine if you don't want to, or if it doesn't, fit.
Almost all of us feel that right away as a kid.
Straight out the womb, you're like, this is wrong.
Excuse me, don't put M on my birth certificate.
Someone
I think
stop.
so.
When did you realize that you felt different than what you were assigned?
around 6 years old.
So this is where my experience is going to be massively different. Because, like, I didn't know, well, first of all, I didn't know what, being trans was until very late in the game. And for two, I grew up in a fairly conservative area. So I didn't have a lot of examples of trans people existing, genderqueer people existing, even like gay people, you know what I mean? So a lot of that was just like things that I heard about in various media, but didn't have like a lot of experience, like talking to people who identify in whatever way. So because of all that, and the fact that my school didn't really have the best education when it comes to gender identity, they didn't teach it at all. There was sex ed, but they didn't teach gender. They only taught like sex. How is Babby formed? How does one get pregnant? What is an STD, which is now usually referred to as an STI? That kind of stuff. So, like, if I go back in time, I can already look at a bunch of different, like, signals that knowing what I know now, would have tripped a bunch of different wires, I guess, for me to, like, oh, wow, I'm actually trans, to figure that out. But I wasn't, in that position where I could know. I just had, like, the vibes.
I always loved girly things, and I was told to repress those. I wanted to grow out my hair and, like, play with Barbies.
Classic.
And, like, be with the girls.
I would always just, like, think, like, oh, I wish there was a button, or I would just wake up one day and I was a woman. I would think.
Well, I mean, let's
that.
be honest. Every AMAB person thinks that at least a couple times every week, right? I mean, come on. That doesn't mean anything.
Constantly.
I went to my mom when I was 4.
Don't ask me why I always pick the feminine characters in video games, okay? It's simply because I like to stare at feminine people while I'm playing the game. Why do I want to look at a dude all day? I mean, I'm not gay. Come on.
I said, Mom, God made a mistake. He put a girl into a boy's body. And she was like, babe, God doesn't make mistakes. You're perfect. And so from
Exactly. God doesn't make mistakes. So you were born trans, and that was his intent, or her intent, or their intent. There you go. True. God makes people trans. True. It's real.
It wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I actually had the realization, like, I am trans. When I first found out, I was like, oh, no, please, no. Like,
were you still trying to be like, oh, I should repress this feeling more?
Pretty much. I was like, maybe we could push down a little bit further.
And that's classic. It's really fucked up, right? Is that, like, the standard male socialization, like the AMAB upbringing, is to literally never talk about your feelings ever to anybody ever. To do that is fruity and also what women do. And you're not supposed to do that. What you're supposed to do is you're supposed to bottle up all of your emotions until one day you get a girlfriend and eventually you marry her. And then you essentially just have her be your at-home therapist for the rest of your life because you never learned how to process your own emotions. And there you go. And then you work all day and die to make somebody else money. Let's go. It's really bad. But that unfortunate upbringing that a lot of, trans women are subject to earlier in their lives if they don't have very supportive, family and whatnot, and like if they didn't even know they were trans way back when, would have to go through would also make it difficult for you to understand that you might be trans. To understand that you might be even gay. Anything that's outside of the normative expectation, you're not really taught as a man, as a boy, to learn how to process your own emotions, be introspective and think about these things, which will then make it more difficult for you to understand that you're trans. And then you have to also lump onto that the bad education on the topic, the fact that many bigoted people are going to try to hide that factual information from you about, the difference between gender and sex. There's a bunch of people trying to obfuscate and lie about that as well. So it is a recipe for people not knowing until a lot later, which is kind of the goal of the transphobes out there, not wanting to teach people the actual scientific and medical consensus on the issue, that gender and sex are different, that the roles we assign to whatever gender are socially constructed, that the clothes people are supposed to wear are not actually tied to their chromosomes or whatever, and that you should be able to be a lot more free about this stuff. They don't want you to have that, which is why they try to do the book burnings, either metaphorical or literal, depending on what, century we're talking about, a couple decades after 1900, some may say, to now in places like Texas and Florida, where they're trying to do censorship when it comes to teaching people about the difference between gender and sex. So that's the point. They don't want you to know about it because they don't want you to be that. They want to have you stay in the normative position, the expected position, as the social roles you were assigned to at birth would dictate, and strip you of any freedom to be anything else. because they don't like freedom. They don't like people being the people that they are. They want to force you to be something that you are not.
The first time I ever saw a trans person was on Jerry Springer.
Oh, God. What a fucking terrible first exposure. God damn it. Yeah, the first time I heard about trans people, they were being brought up on shitty daytime pseudo-reality TV as essentially a punching bag, as a joke. That's probably good for somebody's development. Probably not better to have them learn about it in, the clinical setting of a classroom being taught by a professional in education. Definitely not.
They were called men back then. They were called lady boys, and them being like, oh, I tricked my boyfriend. Guess what? I'm a man. Those kind of conversations hurt society into us thinking like it's okay to treat trans people this way. I myself.
It also hurts trans people. The whole, and I'm about to say a slur, trap idea, which comes from anime and theoretically doesn't have bigoted origins, but leads to bigoted results of not only just feminine men, but also trans women. The idea that, oh, these people, because you're a trans woman or a really feminine man, you're like trying to trick people into having sex with someone they might not otherwise or something, is ludicrous. Like, if anybody is doing this, it is such a super tiny, like, 0.0000000000153% statistically insignificant amount of people that might do that, to the idea that that's like the term we're gonna call them all is ridiculous, and it's not a good term to use. And, like, regardless of the intentions of people in anime using it, the results of that is the trans panic defense being used to good effect by abusers, murderers, sexual assaulters when it comes to usually cis men being attracted to trans women or incredibly feminine men, thinking that both of those people are cis women, and then finding out later on that they're not, and then because of their own insecurity, because of their own ignorance, because of their own lack of self-control, because of their own issues, those cis men end up assaulting and or murdering those people because they feel like they've been quote-unquote tricked. This is why so many trans people are T for T, trans for trans. Contrary to what the gender criticals out there would have you believe, usually trans people are going to stick to other trans people because they are aware that, if you're trans, the experience. You're less likely to be a piece of shit in that way. It's a big problem, and it's not good. And it was a very pervasive stereotype, and it's being described on, the Jerry Springer show way back when by this person. So I feel like we've moved past that in media, at least. A lot of, mainstream-esque media, I don't know that I'm seeing it too much. It might still happen. I guess maybe I don't watch a lot of media in that way. But we do have some good positive examples of trans and genderqueer and queer people in media, which is nice. It's good to see.
From society norms, felt uncomfortable by it. But now, looking back, I felt uncomfortable because I was afraid of opening up and being my true self.
True. And I would add on to that, for a lot of people, I'm not going to say it's this person, but for a lot of people, not only are you going to be afraid of opening up and being your true self, that also entails being afraid of the potential social, societal ramifications. Because unfortunately, we live in a society that isn't fully on board with the medical and scientific consensus on the difference between gender and sex, and the idea that just because you have whatever chromosomes, you don't have to wear the clothes assigned to your chromosomes, and that kind of thing. You don't have to identify in that way. It leads to a lot of people being worried about getting harassed, getting assaulted, getting killed, not being able to get a job, being fired, which, luckily there are some protections for, but not always, especially in the current service workforce. It's still pretty bad. And that is an understandable worry. Like the idea that, if I come out as the person I am and the way that I know I would live a better life, a more fulfilling life, be happier, be more productive in society as a result, if you want to look at it through that capitalist lens, I might face all manner of repercussions. So I might not do that. I might just stay depressed, might just stay, cis, I guess. Do what society expects from me, hate every second of it, and be less productive for society as a result. What's more productive, an out, happy, proud, confident trans person, or a trans person who's forced to be cis and is depressed, tired, yada, yada, yada all the time? This is why, I'm pretty sure, part of why, not only because corporations can pander to queer people nowadays, and also virtue signal that, they're friends of the queers or whatever, because they make their logos rainbow. It's part of why they do that, because they kind of understand it. A lot of these people do. Some of the more ideologically driven capitalists out there might be more willing to be pieces of shit about it still. But I guess at least there's that.
Was it more difficult to come out to yourself or to others?
Myself. It was so hard to come to the realization that not only did I have similarities to the people that I was most afraid of, but that I could also be just like them.
There's people that I feel like pushed me to repress, and I feel like I've more of internalized that. I was like repressing myself the most and the most like transphobic towards myself. I would think like, oh, trans people are weird before I transitioned.
Well, to be fair, all people are weird, and trans people are included in the all people category. Frankly, I'm pretty weird, but you know, it's not a bad thing.
I feel like it was like a deep like insecurity because I was like low-key Desmido.
On my 21st birthday, I finally came out to my mom. We had a long like 2-hour crying talk about how I felt. Coming out to my dad though has been really hard. And I remember him...
It isn't that always the case. So I don't know if this is true, but I wonder if it is the case. So usually the moms out there are going to be more likely to be more accepting because women generally are more socialized to be emotionally available, to have higher emotional intelligence, to be able to understand and empathize with people better. And also, you know, have experience with oppression because on the basis of their gender identity as cis women, in this case, they understand a lot of that and they can empathize with the struggles of other oppressed peoples, which is why, generally speaking, women tend to be more likely to, you know, say, vote for the more progressive option in elections, which is, you know, in this case, the Democrats. So it does seem to usually be the case that it is a lot of the dads out there. Because not only do those dads have difficulty processing their own emotions and understanding themselves, they have difficulty if they have, you know, an AMAB child, a son, and that's how they've conceptualized them. All parents do this. They'll be like, oh my God, this is my baby child, and they're going to grow up to be this way, and they're going to grow up and do that thing, and it's going to correspond to what I think would be good for them, and it's going to correspond to what society has told me is going to be good for them, but, you know, they might not think of it that way. You know, and that's going to be sick, and it's going to be poggers, he's going to be playing football, and he's going to be going to varsity games and he's gonna blah blah blah, but then that doesn't happen, right? Then you have your child who's like, yo, I love you to death, dad, but that ain't me. I'm not trying to do that. And some of these dads are like, wait, hold on just a second. You're telling me that this fictionalized version of you that I have in my head, that I've been thinking about long before you could even talk, is not actually true? That's ridiculous. Don't be fucking crazy. You're out of your mind. And then obviously past that point, how they react to that information is the big thing. So like some of them might be accepting, which is cool. Some of them might not be like transphobic or queerphobic or whatever, and might just have difficulty understanding that, but they come to go on to, you know, after a bunch of introspection and thinking about it and seeing you live your own life and be happy and whatever, come to be more understanding and empathetic about it, and then therefore it's, you know, on a good trajectory to getting better. But for some, there's also the bigotry there, unfortunately. There's the homophobia, because usually homophobia is intertwined with transphobia. So especially for trans women, if you're transphobic, well, you just see them as men. And you assume that women are supposed to be attracted to men. So because this person is saying that they're a woman, well, you're assuming they're attracted to men, which isn't always the case. Like trans women can be lesbians too, or bisexual, pansexual, whatever, or asexual. But that's the assumption. It's like, oh, well, then now my son, quote unquote, is gay, quote unquote, is going to be having sex with men. And then that homophobia influences their interactions and thoughts about their child, and their own insecurity will usually play into that as well. So it seems to be the case that the super supportive, accepting, understanding parent from the jump when you come out is going to be pretty rare, unfortunately. Though, you know, hell yeah, if that is your experience, you should not feel any type of way about that. You should be very happy about that. But then, like, the next, like, down the rung of that would be parents who have this, like, conception of you being the person that corresponds to, you know, your gender assigned at birth. And then they find out that that's not you because you tell them that. And then they, like, have to go through this kind of, like, it's weird to call it a mourning, quote unquote, process, but kind of like this idea of, like, oh, so I had all these ideas, like what I was talking about before, of, like, your future and what was going to be like as it corresponds to your gender assigned at birth. And now that's not going to be it. Now I got to, like, reassess these thoughts that I've had. I think it's reasonable to expect parents in that situation to have to take a fair amount of time to be able to process that. And as long as they do that in healthy ways, you know, they might slip up every now and again and be kind of mean or insensitive, but as long as they're like outwardly abusive, it's a process that somebody's going to go through. Because like you got to remember that as the trans person in this context, you have been thinking about your own identity. You've understood yourself to be trans for usually a lot longer, like could be multiple years longer than the first person you're telling about it. And the first person you're telling about it has had all these other ideas that contradict that about you. And then you're just like telling them that. So like, you're telling them like 10 years, let's say, worth of introspection on your part to that person who knows nothing about it until that moment. That's a good amount of like, that's a good chunk of time that people are going to have to think about. They're going to have to reconceptualize a lot of these things that we weren't previously aware of. And I think it's reasonable to expect that they're going to need some time, as long as they're processing it in a non-abusive way, to deal with that. And then, of course, then you have the abusive people, right? But I don't know. That's just the hope. I want to be clear on that. Not all parents, even if they have like some tendencies, are like the vitriolic, homophobic transphobes. But obviously, this is like a case-by-case contextual basis that you're going to have to make assessments with on your own part. But I think it's good to be understanding of that. Because like the last thing you want to do is like claim that all parents are this way, because that can have some like negative social pushback in the form of like, oh, well, if all parents are this way and you're expecting me to be this way, and now you're interacting with me, the parent, expecting me to be an asshole about it or whatever, that can like have some unfortunate consequence. I don't know. It's difficult. It's a complicated thing, and you don't want to start off on the wrong foot.
And I remember him coming over to my apartment, and I had all of my hormone pills out on the counter, and he asked me like, hey, what are these for? Why are you taking all these pills? He thought I had HIV, and I was like, no, I don't have HIV. I'm transitioning. That didn't go over well with him. And
it's my bad bitch juice, Dad. What are you taking all those pills for, huh? You got arthritis? Huh? You got erectile dysfunction? Dad? What are you taking all those pills for? Don't worry about my pill.
But like, we don't have a relationship now. It is unfortunate, but it's more unfortunate for them.
Hard. After 9 months of kind of like dipping my toes
it's actually a potential bonding experience for like for the trans women out there that like don't want bottom surgery. You know, it's incredibly rare, but there can be some, you know, trans women that do like struggle with erectile dysfunction, for those who don't want bottom surgery. So like you could bond with your dad over that potentially, depending on how old he is. So I'm just like envisioning a scenario. It's kind of weird, but like you're both adults in this situation, obviously. Where it's like you're like 35 and your dad is like 70 and it's like, yo, you should try Viagra or whatever, because like this shit's been fucking poggers for me, Dad. And he's like, oh, really? No way. Maybe I will give it a shot. You know, we need to... I'm just thinking of like a really nice and open, you know, relationship that you would have with your parents when it comes to like the things you talk about. I can never, you know, conceptualize that. You know, I got fucking awesome parents, but like I'm not talking about shit like that. It's just funny. I don't know. Could be like a funny comic or something.
I came out to my girlfriend at the time. That was kind of the hardest part, to just say it out loud. I even like had to
I also wanted to say, in terms of like the dads in this situation, is that I would wonder if like a lot of the dads out there who like wish they had a son, but they ended up having like an AFAB child, and then that assumed girl comes out and like, yo, I'm a trans man. I think it has to have happened where like the dad would be like, holy shit, really? Wait, you're a boy? Let's go, dude. Let's go get the football. I'm ready to play ball in the fucking front yard. It has to have happened, and that seems like a very wholesome thing. Now, obviously, if the, oh my god, I wish I had a son thing manifests because of, like, misogyny or whatever else, and obviously that's bad, but that's not what I'm talking about. A fun, you know, wholesome idea here. Like that one kid the Fox ran a segment on. Oh, yeah. That's true. Yeah, this one. Ryland, yeah, where they're playing frisbee or whatever on the front yard with the dog. Like the most stereotypical white nuclear family possible who just happens to have a trans son. This is a good ass segment. I think we went over this in a previous video. I forget which one it was. Pretty good though. Good segment. Rare Fox News W.
Then I had to come out to my parents. My mom cried. She was very confused. So was my dad. They thought it was a trend that I was just kind of hopping onto. I think everyone thought I was like joking or something. Like
what's unfortunate about that is that I think it's because it's usually taken as a joke, right? Like trans people are the butt of a variety of jokes, usually trans women as being like, oh, men in dresses in a variety of media. Also the unfortunate trans trender shit that kind of gets pushed around, the social contagion narratives about how, oh, it's just a trend. They're just reading all this stuff online and then they blah, blah. It's almost never the case. It's unfortunate, but not only does it lead to like transphobia and other queer-related bigotry being codified into law, like in Texas or Florida, it can also lead to your parents and family members not taking you seriously because they've only ever seen trans people represented as jokes in media. This is why representation is important. Now, representation by itself is not enough because material changes are what is needed when it comes to codifying rights for people into law, increasing the consciousness that people have and the education that people get, and undoing a lot of that bigotry. But representation is still very, very helpful. It's just not a suitable replacement for the aforementioned changes. And we've seen a lot of good examples of that recently, which is cool to see and hope to see more, really, frankly.
How do you think being trans has affected your life most?
It's made me more based, I would say, if I was answering this question. I've become more poggers, Giga Chad, Bazinga. And frankly, I would not change it for the world. You know, I've been asked before, if you could be born as the cis version of whatever it is you are, would you do that? Like, if you, with knowing what you know now, be reborn in that? No, I wouldn't actually. Because I like being trans. I am happy with myself being trans. Simple as. The only thing is different is I wish I knew earlier, and I wish I had the capacity to be who I am now earlier. You know what I mean? But I mean, it is what it is. A late start, you know, slow and steady wins the race.
Just because I'm simultaneously going viral while also trying to transition.
Does it feel?
Oh yeah, that's how I remember this person. This person was being made fun of by Ben Shapiro in the woke TikToks video. Wait, this is the same person, is it not?
Interested in women. And that was a big shock for them considering the past 10 years of coming out as...
I think this is the same person. If we look at their TikTok example, I think it's the same person.
It's been an insane ride just because I'm simultaneously going viral while also trying to transition.
Does it feel like the entire world is watching you as you go through these very personal, vulnerable experiences?
Yes. Yeah, I never expected to be an influencer or a content creator. And it is scary to be putting all of your most vulnerable parts of yourself online.
Also, I have to know, did she make this top herself? This is what, like, this would be like crochet, would it not? I feel like she did. That's my headcanon. I think that she did. That it just makes sense to me. Given everything that I know, this person definitely knits or crochets or whatever. I'm calling it. And it looks good. Because
there were so many times as a boy that I either lashed out or I did things kind of recklessly just because I was so unhappy with who I was. And now when I look at myself on camera or just even in the mirror, I'm like, oh yeah, that feels about right. I'm just... True! It's actually really interesting for me. When I look in the mirror nowadays, I don't like see a man, let's say, right? If I compare it to like what I used to think about when I looked at myself in the mirror, like even what, 5 years ago, roughly, before like I understood my gender identity to be what it is now, I used to think like, oh yeah, that's a boy in the mirror. I'm trying to be a man here. How can I do things to be more masculine? You know, that kind of vibe. And nowadays, when I'm looking in the mirror, even like with my hair up and all this kind of shit, like in my worst moments, I don't see that, which is interesting. Because, like, not much of me has changed outside, like, my hair is longer, I guess. But, like, not much else. It's just, like, it's a lot of mental-related things. Like, it's a lot of, like, my own thought processes changing to match, like, oh, this is the person I'm happy being. This is the person I've likely been for a while without knowing. And now I just don't see that in the mirror anymore, which is really interesting. And also, unfortunately, I've also forgotten how to pose in the mirror masculinely. Like, I don't, it's hard for me to look masculine. Like in poses, especially nowadays. So it's interesting. It's kind of cool, in my opinion. But posing in that way could hit at any moment. And if I die a girl, that's a beautiful thing.
What does transitioning entail?
Transitioning for everyone is a little bit different. A lot of us start HRT. That's like the first step. Some people just take blockers.
That's interesting. to say that a lot of us take HRT, that's the first step. I would wonder, I don't know if there's data on this, like how many trans people start like out the gate with HRT, or how many people like socially transition first without HRT, meaning that like they might wear more feminine articles of clothing, they have the people around them use the whatever pronouns they identify with that, you know, in this case contradict, you know, the assumptions for their gender assigned at birth and all this kind of stuff. I would wonder. Because I would think that social transition would usually be the first step, mostly because trans healthcare is 1, woefully underfunded, 2, woefully under-researched, and 3, woefully inaccessible in the United States, and you'd imagine the world over. So like actually getting HRT, especially if you're younger, can be really difficult. But I wonder, I guess it's obviously going to be different for different people, but you know, I think it all really depends. It just seems like social transition would be easier because you don't need to go through any hoops and hurdles in like the healthcare sense to make that happen. Though obviously you have to go through the hoops and hurdles of social stuff.
Everyone wants to know about trans surgeries, and honestly, like, yes, a lot of trans people do get surgeries, but we do that to fit into societal norms.
For me, transitioning was starting to take hormones. Your skin gets way softer. You lose a lot of body hair. Your fat completely redistributes. Your hair gets softer. Here.
like why? What's not to want, really, from all of that? Come on, all you men out there watching, you don't want softer skin, you don't want nicer hair, you don't want a dumpy. All you estrogenized cis men out there are based and epic, and I support you wholeheartedly.
What's funny is that all of the hormones we take are actually prescribed to cis people in other ways.
True.
In the testosterone blockers, they are used to prevent hair loss for men and women. Spironolactone is the other testosterone blocker. That's just an acne medication. I feel like people make it out to be more of a scary thing, but all of these things people normally take.
When people hear transition, they assume it means physical. Is it more than physical?
I think absolutely. I
oh,
think
for
it's
sure.
mindset. I think it's how you see yourself. I think it's...
Bro, your hormones are crazy. Here's my take, okay? We need to find a way, scientifically speaking, either through like virtual reality that like feels real, or like completely reversible hormones. So like even for like cis people that know they're cis, to like just be on, you know, hormones that contradict what your body is usually producing and just see the changes. It is insane. It is so crazy how much your endocrine system has to do with what your body looks like and how your mind works. Like, the idea that an AMAB person, you suppress your testosterone enough, and then you start taking estradiol or whatever, and then your skin just gets softer, your hairline stops trying to escape your scalp, your hair gets nicer, your fat distribution changes, like you might grow a little bit of titty, your body hair becomes less, and then, like, mentally speaking, your libido can change, the way that you conceptualize yourself can change, your emotional states, like your perceptiveness to a variety of emotions, can start to change as well. It is so wild. So like if you could have this hypothetical scenario where either through VR or like completely reversible hormones, just like put people on these hormones, on HRT for like 6 months and have them notice all of those changes, everybody's conception of like gender identity as like a social construct as it pertains to biological sex completely dissolves, goes away. Because you can't possibly have that view anymore if you've understood that either by going through it yourself, or by having friends who have, or by learning it through education, or by seeing it represented in media. You can't possibly be like, okay, people are born with these chromosomes, so that means they're a man or they're a woman. Because once you've come to understand that, it's like it's foolish to suggest that, because you can change it. Now, currently, medical science can't, you know, change everything, but we're getting there.
If you want to look at it at a more old school transsexual ideology, transitioning means doing the surgeries, getting your meds. But I would say the more new progressive way of thinking is transitioning, is however you want to do it.
Do you think it's appropriate for people to ask about surgery?
Like, I wouldn't ask you right now about like, oh.
So I would say, if you're in a situation like this right now on Anthony Padilla's program, where you're literally there to talk about what it means to be a trans woman and what does the trans woman experience entail, well then yes, that's a fine and appropriate question to ask about, like, oh, what are your thoughts on these surgeries? Blah, 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 blah. Right? But for a random person that you're seeing, like, so say you're at work and you know that you have a trans person coworker, and you ask them, like, oh, have you gotten the surgery yet? Have you gotten the surgery? That's fucking weird, man. What are you doing? And I think she's going to tell us that right now.
however you want to do it.
Do you think it's appropriate for people to ask about surgery?
Like, I wouldn't ask you right now about, like, okay, let's talk about what's in your pants.
Exactly.
I'm willing and ready.
But that's after we shoot. You wouldn't ask somebody about their privates, and then all of a sudden, because they're trans, you feel like you can. My parents
But
have
people
said,
feel entitled to that. Transphobic people feel entitled to that. And not always, like, and it could be, like, not intentional, right? Like, some people might, like, be genuinely curious. Like, okay, I have literally never met a trans person before. What the fuck is that about? I'm going to ask you questions, and they might be inappropriate, but, like, they might not mean anything about it. But a lot of, like, people who do mean something about it are really curious, like, kind of too curious. It makes you think, like, why do you want to know this information? What is your fixation on my genitalia? Do you have something you want to tell the class? You know, do you have something you want to tell everybody? Are you going through something right now? Have I given you some thoughts?
like, when they tell their friends, the first question they'll ask is like, oh, is Dylan getting the surgery? You
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
talk to my parents about my private parts, you nasty perv.
True.
And I feel bad because I'm like, oh my God, like, my family should not have to answer that question.
Why do you think it's become synonymous with trans?
So them in their mind, they want to label me either as a girl with a penis or a girl with a vagina. Like, that's how their heads work. And they're like, okay, we just need to know which box to put Dylan in. I can't wait till we get to a place where someone says they're a woman, we believe they're a woman because they said so.
Everyone's just obsessed,
True.
like, about the bottom surgery. A lot of cis people kind of get really fixated
Weirdly
on...
It's a
fixated on
requirement?
it.
Some people believe that. The majority of trans people, men and women, don't get bottom surgery.
Yeah, that's what Forlorn in the chat said. Have you watched this video already?
Me personally, I don't necessarily feel like I need it.
Based! Same. I don't have any bottom dysphoria at all. I'm perfectly content with what I got. In fact, I could have a bigger dick, frankly, and I'd be, you know, even more elated. But I'm happy with what I have right now. I'm not gonna complain too much. But, like, I don't have any worries about that. And also, I don't have any, like, top dysphoria either. Like, I don't have any kind of dysphoria about my chest either. Like, I'm not the kind of person who wants a big booba. Now, I've been of two minds about it for a while. Like, I don't know necessarily if I do or don't. Because, like, I'm fine with my chest before I got on hormones as it was. So, like, I'm fine with that in perpetuity. But I also don't know, like, I've never had breasts. So maybe I would like them. So it's been, like, a weird kind of process trying to figure that out for me. For me, I've got a little bit of changes now. And I don't feel dysphoria about what the changes I have or what I had previously were, but I have noticed that now I'm starting to feel some things about social interactions that I might have, like strangers on the street. If I'm wearing, like, a tank top and there's a little bit of a bump there that people wouldn't expect, that I might have to, like, worry about that in some way. And in that case, I don't think that's necessarily dysphoria, but rather a kind of anxiety about how people will react. So, like, it's not a me problem, it's a them problem. Right? I'm worried about what kind of stupid shit those hypothetical strangers are going to be talking about, thinking about, worrying about, and how they might interact with me about it. You know what I mean? That's the difference. So, you know, we fix that, I'm chilling. You know?
You're happy with girl dick. I think
Let's
that's
go.
beautiful.
You have a tattoo over here of an
Yes.
angel with showing the girl dick.
I love girl dick.
Let's
It's
go.
very beautiful. It's delicious. It's invasive. That's the other aspect of it. It's it's expensive. Literally have your genitals turned inside out. You're bedridden for like a month. I know girls who are
It's
like
nuts as well. So, like, what's really stupid about right-wingers being like, oh my God, you're chopping your penis off. They chop the penis off. They don't chop the penis off, actually. They more remold it like clay into a different shape. To chop it off would lose a variety of different pieces that you kind of need to make the end result, and that would be dumb, and you wouldn't do that. It's more like you're reshaping it, and it's more interesting in that way to think of it that way, frankly. But of course, you know, the bigots have to use that kind of gruesome view of it to scare people, and that's it.
they can't go out because they gotta dilate, which is just sticking dildos in your new vagina and expanding it and making sure it's very big.
What's been the most unexpected part about transitioning?
Women, just whether it's trans or cis,
Yeah, women,
that
I
have
agree.
like let me into the club, especially the women that I knew before transitioning that have like been like, oh yeah, come, like here's our secrets.
Wait, what kind of secrets are they telling you?
Well, sorry.
Uh-oh. This is what I'm saying. Anthony Padilla, he's got to transition now to get in the know. I spent a day with trans women more like I spent a day as a trans woman. One day, chat, we'll have the ability to do this. We'll have the VR set up or whatever with the haptic feedback. We'll have the completely reversible hormones like I was talking about earlier in that hypothetical. People could exist as a trans person for a set amount of time understand how these hormones affect the body and whatever, the concept of gender being strictly tied to sex completely evaporates.
Shit.
Can't tell. Thank you to the women that initially, right at the beginning of my journey, accepted me from the get-go, because...
Have you felt that? Women taking you in on the group? No, because I don't have friends and I don't socialize. I have 2 friends and I live with both of them. I've got a bunch of internet acquaintances, but that's not really the same. And also, we're all very progressive, so... Other than that, no, because I don't socialize.
Can you define a dead name?
The name that you were assigned at birth. And why we call it dead name is specifically because we want it dead. Like,
You want that name dead.
Yeah, I'm like...
As far as I'm aware, I don't know if this is like strictly the case, but is it not also the case that the term dead name comes from the fact that, for unfortunately, obviously you're trying to change this, for a lot of trans people, the name that is written after you die on your tombstone ends up not being your actual name, i.e. if you were named Jonathan, but, you know, you've changed your name to Susan, they put Jonathan on the tombstone, and that's literally your dead name, meaning that that's the name that you are given after you are dead on your tombstone. I think that's also part of it. I could be wrong about that. I mean, but it's also certainly a struggle as well, and it's really unfortunate. Like a, you know, final kick in the teeth for trans people.
You don't know them. Sorry, you had your time.
We're all about the present. Are you living? No. Okay, you're dead.
It really bothers me that people think that I have to change my name in order
True.
to be a woman. The top comment on like...
So that's me too. I have no special connection to my name necessarily. I like it. You know, Ramon is a pretty cool name. But I don't have any problem with it either. Like, it's just my name. I have no intentions of changing it. I don't even know what I would change it to if I could. So, like, I'm chilling. I'm fine. And, you know, to be fair, Ray, if you want to shorten it to that, is a pretty, you know, gender-neutral name already. So I kind of lucked out in that sense, I suppose. Though, of course, Ramon is very masculine. But I'm still fine with that. Raymond as well, you could do.
Okay, but, like, what would your girl name be? Like... My girl name is Dylan.
Do you think it's appropriate?
Also, I think Dylan is theoretically relatively androgynous. Dylan. It doesn't feel the most masculine.
To ask what people's dead names were.
Oh, no. No, that's, I mean, no. Basically, no.
Yeah. How many times can you say no in 6 seconds?
No. No.
How important are pronouns to you?
It's one of those
Not at all for me. Let's go. But you
things
already
that
knew
people, I don't want to say they should start respecting, but they need to start respecting it, because
True.
if someone says that their pronouns are she, her, hers, that's not up for debate, right? Like, it just is. That's how they identify, period.
I'm a she, her girl. I
Yikes.
hate being called any other pronoun. If anyone calls me he, that's like literally the worst thing. It's less of like me lashing out on whoever said it and more of like, oh, well, what is not feminine? Am I not being passable enough?
For all those people.
And I will say, you might think that I'm super cool because, you know, obviously I am and everybody knows that. But you might think it's neat, like for me, that I don't care about what my pronouns are. I use any and all of them. But that doesn't have to be for you. Like, you might find that to be interesting or whatever. But if you have a special connection to whatever your pronouns are, that's totally fine. Totally valid. But I'm just, you know, cool as well.
Anyone who accidentally misgenders anyone is just move on with it.
True.
Like, if you mess up, correct yourself and move on.
It's not like a death sentence to that relationship.
Yeah, no, like, unfortunately it does happen, but like, we're also human. Like, we mess up sometimes.
I sometimes...
So this is the easy take, okay? Are you ready? Especially for you sissies out there. You accidentally misgender someone, and they're like, no, actually, I use he, him pronouns. You'd be like, oh, sorry, my bad. And then you use he, him pronouns. Very nice. Pretty simple. Pretty easy. So you have to understand that trans people are dealing with this on a near daily basis, especially if they work with a lot of different people or they're going to school around a lot of different people. They're going to be getting misgendered a lot. So unfortunately, and this is not necessarily an absolving of any kind of wrongdoing on the part of these trans people, but some people might react more like mean or rude about it. And, you know, you shouldn't do that as a trans person because, like, you don't know if people are like being mean or not, or like if they genuinely didn't know, if it was a genuine accident. But some people might react a bit more mean, but, you know, as long as you don't do it again, or like as long as you have like a more empathetic conversation, like, oh, I'm sorry, I truly didn't mean anything by it. I'm not very used to, you know, having to worry about people's pronouns or whatever, but I'm trying to get better, blah, blah, blah. If they continue to be mean to you about it, like if you mess up again, well, then it's like, what can you do, really? But I don't think most trans people are going to react that way. In fact, if you talk to trans people about like, oh my God, I didn't mean it, and I'm trying to get better, like I think people would be like, most trans people are going to be like, oh my God, this person actually gives a shit. Holy fuck, wait, I'm about to fucking open this person's third eye. You know, I think that's going to be usually the response. But I just want to say, like, there are going to be people that are going to react a bit more rudely about it because they're like getting it all the goddamn time and having to deal with it. It can be very frustrating and people can lose their patience. But on the flip side of that, not everybody's like being an asshole misgendering you. If they seem to be genuine in their like expressions of like, oh shit, my bad, and they don't continue to do it, like people are going to fuck up in the future. It's just going to happen. No person like learns that somebody's pronouns were not what they assumed they were and then doesn't make the mistake again. It's going to happen again, but it just depends on the context of the situation about how that manifests. Even me, a super woke, you know, massive brain logic lord in the progressive gender sphere, does still fuck up and accidentally use the incorrect pronouns for people that I'm friends with and even live with. But I always am like, oh shit, I mean these pronouns, sorry. And then you move on, and it's you're usually chilling. I would say it's a good habit to get into of, obviously, when you're talking to other people, when the pronouns in question is not around, like you're talking to your friend of a friend, and you're like, oh, if that person uses they, them pronouns, like, oh, they were doing this, or I was with them doing that. You use the correct pronouns with other people. It's a good way to get in the habit of it. In your own mind as well, trying to think about that person with those pronouns is also very helpful in like solidifying that in your mind. You don't want to just limit it to when you're talking about that person to them. You want to try to like make it anytime you're thinking about them or talking about them to other people. Because that can also help the other people that you're talking to as well. Like, oh, why do you keep using they pronouns for that person? Don't they use he, him? It's like, no, they actually use they, them pronouns. And that person's like, oh, I don't know what the fuck that means. Can you explain that? And then you help them understand. And then you move on. It's very cool. I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I hope it's been helpful.
Get a little overwhelmed when somebody makes a really big deal out of it and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry, like I totally see you as a girl. Because then, especially if there's other people around, you become this like, it's like a pointing fingers, like let's all talk about Dylan. It
becomes an event.
Yeah, it's an event and it doesn't need to be.
I feel like a lot of people...
Unfortunately, it seems like in that situation, a lot of trans people become like the main character in a variety of ways. And some people might like see it. So like, for instance, like if you're in a social outing and like somebody accidentally misgenders you, and you're like, oh, actually, I use whatever pronouns. Some people like might take that as you being like mean, and then people might be less receptive to you or think you're being rude or whatever when you're simply just like, yo, I like to be referred to in this way. And that can be unfortunate as well. But, you know, it's all a matter of education.
People are very, very scared to say the wrong thing, to say something offensive. I would say we're very resilient. We've been through like a lot of shit, and
trans people are braver than the troops. I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times, brother man. You gotta respect our troops, hypothetically, but you definitely have to respect our trans troops. And I don't mean the ones on the battlefield, though there are some. I mean those trans troops on the battlefield of life. They are braver than the troops, I'll tell you what.
We're not going to like crumble after being misgendered one time. It's
you know, I put my flag at half-mast any time one of my trans friends gets misgendered.
And to be so scared not to mess up and to never ever like even try to talk to a trans person.
Considering there are so many ideas about what the label trans means, how important do you think identity labels are?
I mean, I wish that they weren't so important.
True.
At least the label of being a trans woman's helpful to me because I now am finding a lot of happiness and euphoria through that. But I think labels really, what they do is they separate us. Our soul's gendered. I don't necessarily...
Hey, that's what I said.
Think so. I think there's something more to it than gender. I think.
Well, personally, I don't think souls exist. But if they did, why would they have a gender? How could they possibly have a gender? Like, is there like this soul society where your soul, when you're alive, is constantly interacting with other souls and they have to assume gender roles? After you die, does your soul go to heaven or whatever? And then there's gender roles in heaven? It's supposed to be heaven. It's supposed to be this magnificent place where you don't have to worry about shit. I gotta worry about being misgendered in heaven? Come on. No shot. Souls are lacking in gender. They are agender, they are asexual, but they don't exist.
Be a disservice to...
And frankly, I'm just as correct about my take on souls as a religious person is about their take on souls.
Try to blanket statement someone's all over being as a gender because
Souls are either tops or bottoms. What the hell are you talking about?
your internal conscience is still your guide and still knows things about yourself that the external can't even tell you.
I don't think labels are necessary. If you like
Y'all
them
already know my take
and
on labels.
you want to use them, like, have at it, use it.
Can souls have gay sex? I feel like if they can, they always are. Anytime a man shakes hands with another man, like at a business meeting, that's their souls bumping uglies. That's my headcanon.
Yes, I'm trans. I'm not going to deny it.
Yeah.
Especially if those two people in that business meeting are platonic coworkers. I don't know what I'm saying.
It doesn't mean that I want to be labeled everywhere I go with a sticker on my forehead. Trans woman. If you don't like labels, don't use them. If you do like labels, use them for yourself. Don't put them on other people.
Can you tell me about the trans agenda? Oh, and if you were sitting there wondering, where are the trans men at? No worries, I Spent the Day with Trans Men is coming out next month.
Oh,
Don't you
shit!
worry. And you know
That's even more exciting for me. I don't give a fuck about trans women. I've seen them too much, god damn it. I'm trying to see some trans men. I want to see some goddamn salt of the earth, manly men. That's what I want to see.
Can't go without thanking Dipsy for sponsoring this episode.
The fuck
Dipsy is
is
an
a
app
Dipsy?
full of short audio.
What was I gonna say? Oh, the trans agenda. We're doing this.
Can you tell me about the trans agenda?
My trans agenda is to have everybody treat everybody else with respect and dignity. And you know, for some, that might be an insidious plot to corrupt humanity. Frankly, I disagree with that take, and I feel like you have to be especially weak-willed, cowardly, and spineless to think that that's the case. And that's literally the trans agenda, is to treat everybody with respect and dignity and to understand people as they are, as they tell you they are. Fair and reasonable. You tell me you're a woman, you're a woman. You tell me you're a man, I doubt it. Go get your estrogen. Give me your T levels. I'm just kidding.
There is no specific trans agenda. If there was a trans agenda, our agenda is we want to be loved. We want to have equal rights. We want to feel normal. We just want to exist.
I hear that it's in some ways what's called a wedge issue.
Wedgie
Something
shoes.
that splits parties further apart to kind of indoctrinate people who are on the fence about which party they should lean toward by saying, oh, no, we got you.
A lot of people think that trans people are so out and proud to specifically get kids to transition. Transitioning isn't fun. I don't know where that comes in, where people think that trans people always want everyone to hurt as much as them. That's not the case.
That's a huge topic, is letting trans people use the appropriate restroom that they want.
So you have to understand, the best answer to this question is kind of in the way that Anthony described it, but not as forcefully as I would have. This whole discourse, this whole controversy around transness is this. Are you ready for this? Okay, ready? Bear with me. This is going to be a bit of a brain blaster. You might want to hold on your seats. If you have a seatbelt, you want to strap that in. If you got a helmet around you, you might want to put that on, because this is going to shell shock you. Okay, are you ready? The Republican Party and conservatives generally do not have, and the studies bear this out, any policies to make people's lives better. Studies usually show that conservative policy ends up making the average person's lives worse. The primary thing they want to do is cut taxes for the wealthy, because they are also wealthy or wanting to be wealthy, and deregulate corporations so that the people that own those corporations can make more money, and that's it. And because that's not really the most popular of a platform to run on, as these conservatives, Republicans, they have to worry about other things, like wedge issues, what we were talking about before. So for a time, it was segregation, slavery even. They were worried about that. Well, then, the slaves are ostensibly emancipated, the 13th Amendment, which still allows for slavery if you're, convicted of a federal crime. So then, we're still fighting all these fights, but we're moving forward, and now we got to worry about women. Like, women, they want to go into the workforce. Can't have that. They want to be treated like other actual human beings. I can't deal with abortion, birth control. They want to have well, we can't do that. So then now that's the issue. Okay, well, Roe v. Wade was there, but now it's not. So you got to worry about that again, but for a time you didn't. Oh, so then and now it's the gay people. Gay people, they want to get married. The people are trying to bake cakes for gay people. Why should they have to? So that was the issue. Oh, well then, you know, Obama and the Supreme Court legalized gay in 2015, so now you can't really fight about that for now. So then, now we've got, the trans people, the transes of the world. Now, they're the big boogeymen, they're the big issue. And the common thread between all of these is, one, conservatives, Republicans hate you and want you to suffer if you're not a cis, heterosexual, white man who owns capital. Because, you know, you poor white sissies out there, you can get those hands too, apparently. You've experienced that yourself if you're watching. And also, they don't have any policy for you. They only have policy for the people that are wealthy, that are rich. And they can only feed you these little crumbs when they talk about, you know, if you have some weird baked-in preconceptions about black, brown people, women, trans people, gay people, we'll throw you a little bit of bones and like, oh, well, these people can't use the same bathroom that they want to use anymore or whatever. You know, that gets done, okay, and now what? You're still poor. You're still struggling to keep the lights on. You're still struggling to put food on the table for your kids. Why? Because they're not actually trying to help you. They're trying to give you these little things that feel like wins because they support your preconceived biases that they've actually tried very hard to make you grow up into having, but they don't actually give you anything. They don't give you higher wages. They don't give you the ability to bargain for better wages at your job through a union. They don't give you good infrastructure, so you end up having to buy a car and spend thousands of dollars to keep it, maintain, pay for the gas, to drive to and from your job to your home or whatever else you have to do, bring your kids to school or whatever, because the infrastructure that's been built, some of that for the racist reasons we talked about before, some of that because the automobile industry thoroughly fucking ruined the infrastructure in this country as well. Now you have to have a car to get everywhere, so you're not walking anywhere and you have to bring your kids everywhere. Also, you're not getting healthcare. You're going into medical debt because you can't pay your bills, because you don't live in a civilized country like other comparable OECD nations that provide healthcare for their people free at service and that is paid for through taxpayer dollars. You know, imagine getting a service from the taxes that you pay the government. Kind of a crazy concept that Americans are not too familiar with, but you're not getting that. So you got people rationing insulin and dying because they just don't go to the doctor because they don't want to go into debt. You have people who can't get a higher education, go into the STEM field to be able to pay back that loan, so you end up working food service for the rest of your life, or, you know, doing back-breaking manual labor that you don't actually want to do until you die. That's all you get from these conservatives, these Republicans, because you're not that wealthy person. And if you are, what the fuck are you doing watching this video? That's the longer answer. So the shorter answer is conservatives hate you, want you to suffer, and also don't have any good policy for their base, so they have to weaponize fear, disgust, and hatred against people that don't look like their base, i.e. white, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant people. Feed them those crumbs and keep them satiated so they don't rise up over the fact that they're still getting dicked over by the people who are not willing to even give them decent health. That's it.
And here's the reality. A trans person is not going to attack you in the bathroom. If a man wanted to attack a woman that's using the restroom, he can just walk into the bathroom. He doesn't need to put on a dress and long hair to do it.
It's funny, too. The conservatives will be like, oh my God, gun-free zones? Like, what is a gun-free zone? Like, if the person's going to go in there with a gun, they're just going to bring the gun anyway. What's the gun-free zone sign going to do? That's not going to stop them. Conservatives will say that and then also be like, oh, well, if we let trans people into the bathroom, then this is going to happen. Like, what is the man-free zone on the women's restroom doing to stop a man from going in there and committing crimes? It's not how that works. Just let trans people use the bathroom that they're comfortable with using, because they're just going in there to piss and shit just like you and get the fuck out.
Things so toxic about looking at trans people like predators or looking at them as like violent people, because we're more scared of you than you are of us at times. Yet the narrative is that it's all these people that are actually scared of us. That argument is so telling.
All those people are pussies, by the way.
Of where we are at when it comes to trans people. I'm not trying to invade your space. I'm just trying to go to the bathroom.
I'm just trying to take a shit.
How do you feel about teens transitioning? There's a lot of debate about if a teen feels that they are trans or not the gender that was assigned to them at birth, that they should not be able to transition or take puberty blockers. How do you feel about all that?
Pretty interesting conversation. I got some takes.
HRT, you have to have a medical diagnosis. a lot of people have to go through like a psychiatric analysis and go to a primary care provider and get evaluated by both. It takes a lot of guts to come out as trans, and if a child is having those thoughts and they're coming to you, that's really hard to do for adults. But it's even harder to do for kids to like, be honest with themselves about it.
I think
especially if those kids understand what it means to be trans at that point, they're more than likely going to understand what it means to be trans in a social context. Like, oh, if I am trans and people know it, I'm going to have to deal with this shit. I am going to get bullied at school more than likely. I'm going to have to put up with all manner of bullshit that I wouldn't have to otherwise. And that's not going to stop me because that's the person I am. Nobody is putting themselves through that. And ideally, nobody should have to, because that shouldn't be the consequence of being trans. But unfortunately, in society currently, and in many places it is, nobody's going to do that for shits and giggles. Nobody's going to do that because it's the cool thing to do.
A teen feels comfortable presenting in the opposite gender, then I would say the correct course of action is puberty blockers if that's what they want. Puberty is like a very, in a way, traumatic thing. Puberty is what makes it so hard, makes it the reason you have to get surgeries. Like your bones form to a certain way.
And is this permanent?
No, it can be reversed. If a child starts puberty blockers and then decides to stop, the puberty will onset. And so you will end up going through puberty. There's not very many cases of a kid going on puberty blockers and then going off of at like age 30 or something and then hitting puberty. What we do know is if people go off of it, and if they go off of it, it would be probably around that same young age or in their early 20s, they will still go through puberty.
True. So here's the simple take, okay? Say it with me, chat. You've heard me say this a billion times. Say it with me. Are you ready? In order to be prescribed puberty blockers and HRT as a youth, you have to go through usually years of medical evaluations from mental and medical health professionals, as well as your own internal evaluations of yourself, as well as your parents are usually very involved in the process as well. And then eventually, you might, usually after socially transitioning or doing some amount of social transition, i.e. using different pronouns, dressing in a different way, etc., maybe even like using a different name, you might end up being prescribed with puberty blockers. What that is to do is to give you more time, like Forlorn in the chat says, to put pause on your puberty for a little bit. You continue to go through those assessments, that analysis with those professionals yourself, and then eventually, if it turns out you are actually cis, well then you're taken off the puberty blockers, and then you just have a puberty around that time, which can either be around the time that you normally would, or a little bit later, and that you just have a late puberty. So a lot of cis kids will go through what's called a precocious puberty, meaning that they're going through puberty way too early at a point where it would be detrimental to their health. So then they get put on puberty blockers and then they're taken off them around a time that is better for them and their health. And they just go through the puberty then. The same thing. However, if it turns out that that person is actually trans, then they end up going through HRT and they go through the puberty with that HRT as it correlates to the results of all of this analysis between the mental and medical health professionals as well as themselves with the input of the parents, and then you go forward with that. Pretty simple, pretty standard. It's almost like this is called the standards of care for a reason. It's almost like it's the medical consensus on the issue. And that's why right-wingers want to change it. So, the reason why a lot of these people, these bigots that don't want that very long, convoluted, and extensive process to happen, I don't think it's because they think that, oh, well, by not allowing trans kids to be able to get the puberty blockers or whatever, they'll find out that they're actually cis later on and we'll stop them from being trans or whatever. I don't think that's the actual goal necessarily. I think they understand that trans kids exist, but they don't want them to. So, in order to facilitate their ideal worldview where trans people don't exist, because that's the logical endpoint of these conservatives, these right-wingers, and their anti-trans takes, they want to stop people from being able to have that very long process of figuring that out, because those trans people, the people that are lucky enough to understand that about themselves and actually get the healthcare related to it, and the social changes as well related to it, those people end up so-called passing better than those who have gone through puberty, which is to say that these insecure bigots do not want to find themselves attracted to these people that they find to be reprehensible, i.e. trans people. So if you force a trans person to go through the puberty that is not what they want, that does not correspond to their gender identity, you make it so that those people are more so-called clockable, meaning that stopping trans kids from being able to go through the standards of care and actually have those results at the end makes it so that those trans people who end up transitioning later in life, or in this ideal circumstance for the right-wingers, not at all, makes it easier to understand that a person is trans and then makes it easier to oppress them. That's it. So, once again, we can always tell, quote unquote, is not a statement of fact. It is a statement of intent. They do not want trans people to exist, and they do not want trans people to be able to get the care that they can get, that they should be able to get, because they don't want trans people to pass, because they want to always be able to tell. Why do they want to always be able to tell? So that they can more easily oppress the trans people. Simple as. They have to maintain the hierarchy somehow. That's it.
I hear plenty of the conversation surrounding trans people. People bring up the amount of people that detransition. It's kind of paints
which is
it
incredibly
as so many
tiny,
people
by the way.
transitioning, so then they detransition, and then they still have regrets because they ever transitioned in the first place. How frequently does that happen? And I also can't go without thanking
Oh
Honey.
my god. You filthy bitch.
Now, back to the world of trans women.
The times that I see people detransition in media, that one person gets blasted and posted all over media, and how trans people are invalid because this one person decided to detransition. I know a lot of trans people and none of them have detransitioned. We're all happier. We're all less suicidal, if suicidal at all, because we transitioned.
It's an extremely, extremely rare case.
True.
The satisfactory.
So the simple fact of the matter is that the rates of detransitioning are incredibly low. Incredibly low. And that incredibly low rate of detransition should not be used as justification to deny care to other people that will not detransition, statistically. Every person that does detransition, they've got their own specific worries and complex things that they have to worry about, and that's fine. That's valid. If you thought you were trans and you began your transition, but then you understood yourself to not be trans and you end up detransitioning, that's life. Welcome to being a human being. People's conceptions of themselves change. People's conceptions of themselves might not always be 100% accurate. However, it seems like a grand majority of the time in the case of trans people, they are correct on that assessment. Even for the small amount of people that do detransition, usually those people are detransitioning not because they don't understand themselves to be trans anymore, but rather that, one, they don't have the money to continue getting their hormones, so they have to stop taking them, and then they end up detransitioning from that physically. Or socially, they are met with a massive onslaught of social ramifications, unfortunately, for being trans. So they end up throwing in the towel, I guess, and they end up detransitioning because of that, because the social ramifications were too great. Or they're forced out of it, which is the monetary concern, etc., etc. And the other aspect of that is they actually understood themselves to not be trans anymore. That's fine. People who detransition for the reason of not actually being trans and understanding that about themselves are completely valid and should be given as much respect as anybody else. The unfortunate thing is, it's a lot of money to be made being a so-called detransitioner online. There's a lot of bigots, a lot of transphobes, right-wingers out there that are very excited to weaponize your trauma as a person who has detransitioned for their political gain, and they will give you money to allow them to do that. They will give you clout to allow them to do that, which is when they talk about in the video, oh my God, these people who do detransition, they're plastered all over the media. It's to meet that end, because right-wingers don't like detransitioners any more than they like people who have transitioned. They just are fine with weaponizing the detransitioner for their political end of making it so that nobody could ever transition, ever. And unfortunately, because we live in a society and people need money to live, some people fall victim to that perverse incentive of allowing that to happen, of taking that money, of taking that clout. And then, also some of these people could just be genuinely, pieces of shit as well. That's also possible. And it's pretty fucked up.
Rate of HRT, of hormone replacement therapy, is 98%.
Aha! From Cornell University, based Anthony Padilla and his team. On average, 97% of transgender people are happy with their decision to transition. The overwhelming majority.
Half of that remaining percentage may detransition because they are not accepted by family, by work, not able to get their medication. There are tons of reasons why people detransition, and I regretted it is the least common.
Only 0.4% of all trans people detransitioned because they felt the transition was not right for them. Wow. So, surely a logical facts over feelings kind of analysis is going to be like, oh yeah, well, we should use that 0.4% of people who have detransitioned because they didn't, they have understood themselves to not be trans. Well, we should use that to justify not letting the other overwhelming percentage of trans people who are happy with their transition, we should stop them from being able to do it. You're not that dumb. Please tell me you are not that dumb. Come on. You are not as dumb as the people on the right think that you are.
People are so obsessed with this fringe case because they want to detransition us at the end of the day. And it's already
that is very
happening.
true, Forlorn, as well. Yeah, trans people are an incredibly infinitesimally small percentage of the overall population as well. So the super tiny fractional amount of people who detransition because they understood themselves to not be trans is an infinitesimally small fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of an already small percentage. You are not as dumb as these conservatives think you are. I do not believe that. I don't think that's true.
In southern states for trans kids who now no longer have access to hormones, there are trans kids who are literally being detransitioned because they legally cannot transition.
Which, by the way, is a form of genocide. I will say it. I've had this take for a while. I could say it's kind of akin to cultural genocide, but not even. It's in some ways worse because there are physical ramifications of medically forcibly detransitioning people. You are effectively trying to move one group, trans people, and force them to be the other group, cis people. So, let's say there are, hypothetically, a bunch of Christians out there in a non-Christian majority nation. And that non-Christian majority nation, whatever religion it is, happens to be a theocratic dictatorship. And that dictatorship ends up making it illegal to have churches for Christianity, to practice Christianity, to have symbols of Christianity on your person in your home. They forcibly remove all of that from you. If you're found out to be practicing Christianity, they bring you to, I don't know, jail or a camp somewhere to, try to conversion therapy you to not be Christian anymore. That's genocidal. That is a form of ethnic cleansing. They're trying to stop people from being Christian and trying to force them to be whatever the religion is of the state then. That's bad. And it's the same concept applied to trying to forcibly detransition people. If you look at the Holocaust Museum, who might know a thing or two about genocides, just guessing, and the steps that they line out through their study of the Holocaust, the steps toward genocide, and the things that tend to happen as a precursor to it, we're pretty far along those steps in the United States when it comes to trans people. I've talked about this in previous videos. Many other people have on the left as well. It's not good, in my opinion, frankly. Not a big fan of that.
And what about the violence that trans women face?
It happens all the time. Just last
Way
year,
too frequently.
around 45 trans people reported got killed. There's not that many trans people out there anyway, so killing 45 of us is a huge percentage of us. A lot of POC trans people receive the most violence.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of times the violence that is committed on trans people is by people who love us, as in like our lovers, people we have relationships with, people we have sexual relationships of. That's like the biggest number of people who are killing trans people.
Even some parents. There have been reports of like transphobic parents killing their trans children. It's also the case for like, queer youth in general. Like, if your kid turns out to be gay, that has happened as well. And it is genuinely the case that trans women of color, black trans women in specific, but all trans women of color, are held to an incredibly heightened level of scrutiny because not only do they have to deal with transphobia, not only do they have to deal with homophobia as it relates to that transphobia, not only do they have to deal with misogyny as it relates to that transphobia, as it relates to that homophobia, they also have to deal with the racism as it pertains to their ethnicity and skin color. And there's a whole world of bullshit that goes into that causes this. So like if you look at how black women are perceived by racists, it's usually by assigning those black women very masculine characteristics. Oh, she's very loud, violent, aggressive, rude. And usually it's assigning masculine aesthetics to that black woman as well. Oh, like, oh my God, she's so like mannish or whatever. Like they did this with Michelle Obama, even the former first lady for Barack Obama's wife. All this talk about, oh my God, she's like a man or whatever. She's got very mannish features. That kind of misogyny applied to even a cis woman in that way. Imagine how that would be applied to a trans black woman, right? Infinitely worse, because you have all these other compounding factors on top of it. Not even to mention the socioeconomic class of people here, which unfortunately in the United States for black and brown people skews lower on the socioeconomic status because of a variety of systemic oppressions. You end up having that also being a barrier not only to the healthcare system, but also a monetary barrier for that healthcare, for any procedures related to it. And then you have this additional layer of that racism that goes along with it. And it's just an absolute fucking shit show. So it's not to say that, you know, if you're very wealthy, it can't happen to you either, because it literally happened to Michelle Obama in the case that she's cis, a similar kind of thing, I guess, in that analogy. But it also happens to black trans women who are wealthier, because while the intersectional analysis is absolutely at play here, I mean, I should say because the intersectional analysis of these oppressions are at play here, it is tremendously fucked up.
If you could say one message to your younger self.
It's funny because I remember the first transvestigation thing before the term was coined was about Michelle Obama. Yeah, that's actually really true. And it's because she's a cis woman, but she's a black cis woman. Racism is incredibly intertwined with transphobia. Anti-Semitism is incredibly intertwined with transphobia. We had a very recent video that came out, how transphobia melts your brain, that it did a really deep dive on that if you want to learn more. There'll be a link to it somewhere.
What would you say to that younger self?
Hi, baby Dylan. We have always been pretty fragile and we've been soft, and sometimes it works against us, but sometimes it really has value. And I think that your vulnerability is your power, your femininity is your power. I'm so happy that at one point you felt like your real self, and then we lost it for a while. But we found it again, and I'm here, and I'm telling you that it was worth it.
Let's
it will all
go.
be worth it in the end, because babe, you're in a crochet dress.
It was crochet.
With your name on it.
With my name on it. And
wait, so she did crochet it herself.
You know what?
My brain is huge. How can I make such a prediction? Oh, it's because I'm smart as fuck. Because I just know. Okay, I can always tell, frankly, when a trans woman has created her own clothing.
What is it about being trans that brings you the most joy?
The most joy that I felt being trans is the trans community. It's the trans sisterhood of traveling pants, honestly.
I think it's undeniable how happy I am.
Oh,
I think that gives me so much joy to know that other people are looking at me in a way that goes, wow, that person really knows who they are. The joy comes from helping others.
Gender
and from,
euphoria.
And knowing that, like, it feels so good to wear what I want, let me tell you. And it feels so good to hear people say she...
Acceptance?
Yeah, that's joy for me.
Shocking, really. People want to be accepted for who they are, you know, respected, treated with dignity, maybe even, you know, celebrated for who they are. Makes people feel good.
I spent a day with trans women, and one thing that really sits with me is how the demands and the shame imposed on us by others can echo inside our heads and cause us to doubt or even hate ourselves. But that internalized
Don't hate yourselves, chat. That's cringe. And you want to be based. I do like that we ended on a very positive note here in terms of like what brings you joy, because that's always very needed in conversations like this. And I hope that, you know, it's been pretty nice for you to watch this as well. I know it's always a lot of heavy topics, because of course it is, but I do hope that the ways that I've been able to talk about it, the ways that I continue to talk about it on my channel, do bring you some kind of comfort, because people have said that. People have expressed that the way I talk about these things, the way that I talk about even myself and how I interpret them, really helps them solidify a variety of things about themselves. Even like cis people have told me this, which is really cool to see. And I hope it's been very nice.
And the shame imposed on us by others can echo inside our heads and cause us to doubt or even hate ourselves. But that internalized limitation of who we think we should be for others may be the biggest hurdle in allowing us to truly enjoy happiness within the world and within ourselves.
Very good video.
I remember I was watching Smosh like as a kid, and
More
there
like
was like
Smush.
one episode where
Am I
like you
right?
get boobs. I saw that and was like, oh,
Right, really?
is it possible?
Ian typed in on a
I
keyboard
saw-
that I have boobs,
I
and then I had boobs.
Yeah, I remember I saw that. I was like, can I get a keyboard like that though? Can I get a keyboard? Like,
Did that start you down your
yeah,
tracks?
like Anthony's on
Bro,
to
Anthony
something.
Padilla cracked this woman's egg. That's crazy. Bro, how many people amongst us can talk to the person who played a part in influencing their understanding of their identity in such a foundational way? God damn, that must be insane. That must be wild.
I was there at the
Keyboard.
beginning of your tracks.
Yeah,
journey.
yeah, literally.
That's crazy. Anthony Padilla is such a wholesome, genuine person, it would seem. That's the vibe I get. Feels good, man. Well, I feel like I've already talked your ear off. Hope you had fun. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope some of the things that I'm able to say and some of the jokes I've been able to crack have given you a good brain feeling. And have a good day. This video's kind of call-out is actually another legendary dual call-out because I have once again forgotten to do it in time for the last video. Lamau. Congratulations to both the Caretaker's Apprentice and Toaster Roaster for winning together and being part of this special event catalyzed by my own incompetence. If you'd like to be the next Connor Call It, all you gotta do is follow me on Twitter at ConnorCC, retweet my video links when they go live. Remember to subscribe to the channel, put all notifications on, hit the bell. Appreciate that as well. Hit the like button, leave a comment down below about, I forgot what the video was about. And have a great day!